Sewing School to talk about couture, but a special aspect of couture, pants. It's an art form in itself. We're going to show you a variety of techniques for shaping and making beautiful pants, and then we'll show you the results of our work in wonderful fashion. I'd like to introduce you to Karen. She's a student in our school, and she is the person that made all the beautiful fashions that you're going to see throughout this video. I'd like to start now right at the beginning in taking measurements. These are very critical in pants, and it is the first thing that you should do when you start your project. Karen's waist measures 27 inches. The next measurement is the hip. You want to be sure that you're taking the fullest part of the body and that your tape measure is parallel to the floor. Her hips are 37 inches. And the next is the crotch measurement. You want to put the tape measure between your legs and have it just touch the string in the front and come around and have the tape measure touch the string in the back. Karen's crotch length is 27 3/4 inches. We'll begin now getting the paper pattern ready for you to try it on. You want to purchase your pattern by your hip measurement. It's easy to adjust the crotch by measurement prior to trying the pattern on, and we'll adjust the waist when you put the pattern on. Let's take Karen's measurements and show how we can adjust the crotch length before ever trying the paper pattern. Karen, and I'll call that you, was 27 3/4 inches in her crotch. To that we need to add ease. The amount of ease that you're going to need to add to a pair of pants is going to be relative to your body shape. There are two major body shapes when we talk about pants. One is the H shape. That's a person whose waist and hip measurement is very close together. A rather straight figure. The second body shape is what we call a heart-shaped fanny. There is a strong ratio between the waist and the hip measurement. Now this doesn't have anything to do with size. No matter what size, you will fall into one of these two categories. An H-shaped figure type requires a 1/2 inch ease. A heart-shaped fanny requires 3/4 inch ease. Because Karen falls within the heart-shaped silhouette, we're going to add 3/4 inch ease for a total of 28.5 inches. The next step is to compare the actual body plus ease with the paper pattern. We want to know that this paper pattern has enough length to get around our body. So we're going to measure length. You need to be very accurate, and I suggest that you measure at least twice to be sure you come up with the same number. If you don't, measure again. This is terribly important. Take your tape measure and write it right on the edge, starting at the stitching line at the waist, and write it right around the crotch curve. Continue on the back until you reach the waistline seam of the center back. This pattern measures 25.5 inches. So let's put that down. The paper equals 25.5 inches. The difference between the paper pattern and the actual body plus ease is 3 inches. The method I prefer for lengthening or shortening a crotch, and the one that we've been most successful with, is to lengthen or shorten equally front and back. So we need to divide that by 2, and we need to add 1.5 inches both in the front and the back. Let me show you how we're going to do this. Here's the front, and here's the back of your pant. You will have a grain line shown on your paper pattern. With your see-through ruler, you are going to draw a perfect cross grain line, both in the front and in the back. Now, where should that be? It should be somewhere after the crotch curve, but also below the darts. I'm going to show you exactly how we do that on a paper pattern. But what you'll be doing is inserting a piece of tissue paper equal to the half of the difference between your body and the paper pattern. So in this case, with Karen's pants, we're going to increase it by 1.5 inches. Now, throughout this next little segment, I'm going to be using a magic marker so that you can see on the paper pattern. But I would caution you that when you're doing these kinds of paper adjustments, that you use a lead pencil and sharpen it frequently, because a magic marker is much too wide when we're being as accurate as we possibly can on a paper pattern. So, line up your see-through ruler, and going against the straight of the grain, it's very easy to get a valid cross grain line. And we'll just quickly cut that apart. Now, take a piece of tissue paper, and I prefer colored tissue paper because it always shows me exactly where the adjustments were made. And using your see-through ruler again, you're going to make 2 lines 1.5 inches apart. Now, because we have to match these 2 pieces evenly, you want a continuation of the grain line. So put a grain line right down the middle of your tissue paper. Now it's very easy and quick too to match this to your line. Use Scotch tape, and I will caution you to use small pieces because you always want to press your paper pattern before you put it to your fabric. So don't go and take large pieces like that that will shrivel underneath the iron. Just be a little bit cautious and take little pieces. Now, it's very easy for us to match the grain line arrow at the top of this line, and we will automatically know that we're in the right place. Now, it's going to be necessary for you to straighten the back, and I would remind you that where the crotch curve stops and the center back is a straight line. So again, take your ruler and just line it up and draw a straight line. On the hip side, you have a curve, and no matter how flat you are on the side, it is still a curve. So you want to use your French curve and find that place that best matches your pattern and draw your line. And just cut off the excess. So now what we have done is we have added 1.5 inches across the back, and we're going to now have to add 1.5 inches to the front. But you may come up against something like a slash pocket, a couple of pleats, that if you actually went across the whole front, you would get involved with that construction. So I'm going to show you a really easy, fast way to avoid the pocket construction. The first thing you're going to do is be sure that your grain line is continued all the way up your pant. And then just indicate on your paper pattern where the pocket pouch is as well as the slash. And somewhere beneath that, draw a cross grain line. Now what we're going to do is to cut across down the grain line and across to the side seam, and we can increase it evenly. Let me show you how we do that in a little pattern so that you can get the concept. We're going to draw a cross grain line to the center front and another one below the pocket pouch. And be real accurate when you do that. Now watch what happens. I'm going to cut in from the center front, down on the grain line, and across. So I really have two pieces. So here they are in their original form. So every time I move those up along the grain line, whatever I add here is automatically added below, which means I truly have added it all the way across, but I haven't broken in to any of my pocket construction. So let me show you that in the real thing. Here we have a slash pocket construction. This happens to have a dart in the front. So we've added across to the center front line, down the grain line, and across to the side seam. So we have added 1.5 inches in length in the front. We have added 1.5 inches of length in the back, which means our crotch length has been increased by a total of 3 inches. What you want to do now is try on your paper pattern. But it's very difficult to try on pants without ripping and tearing into the tissue paper. So when you are doing pants, you want to always use a fabric stabilizer on the back of your pattern. And Fashion is designed to do exactly that. It's 100% woven cotton, which has beads on the back, very similar to interfacing, which you can actually fuse to your paper. The trick is that you're going to kind of do it in reverse of how you fuse interfacing. You're going to lay the Fashion down on your board with the beaded side up. And then you'll proceed to lay your paper pattern down. And you're going to start fusing in the middle. About 10 seconds. Do a gentle iron. Don't let your iron pass the paper, otherwise the beads will stick to your iron. So that's where you can use a transfuse sheet. Simply lay it down, and that allows you to fuse right over to the edge. This tears away. Once you have fused your entire pattern piece, you can simply cut out on the outside edges, and you have stabilized your pattern. What it allows you to do is to have a paper pattern ready to try on that will act as if it's cloth. There's just one more thing you need to do before you pin your paper pattern together. You want to draw a line between the slash mark at the waist and the slash mark on the side seam. Many patterns don't have this printed on, but it needs to be a match mark in which you can attach your garment front to this specific line. So just draw it with a pencil. Now we'll pin the paper pattern together. You want to be as accurate in pinning your pattern together as you would be with the fashion fabric. Don't be sloppy when you're pinning paper together. Just think of it as a prototype for the finished garment. It needs to be extremely accurate. And go ahead and pin your pleats together, matching the dots. And certainly you would pin the darts together in the back if there are any. And then pin both the side seam and the inseam. Be very careful here to match dots, notches. We want this to be as like the real garment as we possibly can. Once you have pinned your side seams and you pin your inseams, you're ready to try on your paper pattern. And I'll go over now and try it on Karen so that you can see how it looks. You always want to try on the paper pattern and make sure that the hem is turned up even more than you would want the finished garment so that it's not breaking on the foot and destroying your fit. Tie a string around your waist. This is going to do two things simultaneously. It's going to identify where your waist is, and it's also giving you something to pin into. Lift your pleats so that they are hanging nice and straight. Check the pocket to be sure it's got sufficient amount of curve for your hand to get in. And then you want to check both the back and the side seam. And here again, go ahead and stick a couple of pins in here just to hold it. Take a look at the crease, take a look at the side seam, that it's hanging absolutely straight. You can even walk around in it, just walk around a little bit, just to get a feel of how the pant will look. Always a three-way mirror is wonderful if you have one. Once you have done that, you're going to mark the waist. And you want to mark it with a pencil and not a magic marker, but I will mark it with the magic marker. And remember, we're going on the bottom of the string. What this will do is indicate the exact placement of your waistline as it compares to the paper pattern. I'd like to talk to you just a minute about fabric preparation. Never is it more important than when you're making pants. You want to pre-shrink your fabric. Either wash it if that's the way you're going to care for your garment, or have it steam pressed at a dry cleaner. Remember that the dry cleaner and you, when you're washing it, are only pre-shrinking it. You are not setting it on the grain. So after it is pre-shrunk, you need to set it on the grain. You want to be sure that you have true cross grains and true length of grains. Easy way with most fabrics is to simply take a little snip What you'll notice here is that at one end it's about 5/8 of an inch, and it's almost an inch at the other end, which means that if this had not been grained up, your pant would twist ever so slightly and you would never be able to get it out. So be absolutely sure that your fabric is perfectly on the grain. What you've been able to do now is to take the center line of your pant and simply line it up on the fabric, one at one end and one at the other. Now you're absolutely sure that your pant is on grain. To ensure accuracy, you want to cut pants out single thickness. This will really help you in marking and will guarantee you perfect results in the finished garment. If you would like to test a pattern to be absolutely sure that you're working on grain, try a plaid. It's the master's touch. You'll notice in the back that the grain comes out of the heel and comes directly up the pant, but it comes closer together at the center back. The center back of a pair of pants is the primary fitting point to get from the hip width into the waist. To ensure grain retention, thread base the crease line, the knee line, the hem line, and all stitching lines. Let's talk for just a minute about underlining. There are such advantages to underlining. The first is it prevents wrinkling. And with linen being such a couture fabric and making the most beautiful pants, you would like to prevent wrinkling. So you can underline linen pants with silk organza in order to prevent wrinkles. I can't help but show you here a little polka dot seam finish. That's a couture secret, and we frequently put them on the insides of clothes because we know they're there and it makes us feel wonderful. In cotton, there are a variety of beautiful prints available today, and there are thinner weight cotton for summer. They make wonderful pants if you will underline them with cotton batiste. A pure 100% cotton batiste will add just the body you need, but will not add any additional warmth. So the two major choices you have if you want to underline are silk organza and cotton batiste. In the sequence of making your pants, you want to cut and mark your lining at the same time you cut and mark your fashion fabric. This shawl cover-up with a big ruffle is not only fun to wear, but it becomes very practical when you have a backless jumpsuit for those cool summer evenings. You'll notice that the bodice pulls out two colors from the print, a large block of the yellow flower, and then piping in the green leaves. This fashion-forward pant in wool crepe combines the look of a pant with the bias sarong of a skirt. It's tied gently at the waist and gives a very fluid feeling, which is carried out in the cowl of the silk jacquard blouse. Summer fun at the beach. When you have a wonderful print, use some couture detailing by adding cone pockets and a coordinated button. To carry through the frivolous idea, use a t-shirt with cutouts. Put flowers around the neck, and you might even add a butterfly to the center of one. One of the first pieces of construction you can do in your pant is a slash pocket. You want to do it when the front piece is still in its single form before it has been attached to the back. The reason that you can do the slash pocket construction now is because it is not a fitting line. As we discussed previously, it's so important to mark the slash line on your paper pattern and then to transfer it to the fashion fabric. And this is the place where I don't think I would give you much choice than to say it really should be thread basted. You need that exact mark where your slash line crosses at the waist and where your slash line crosses the side seam. If perchance you are off by even 1/8 of an inch, your pocket is very likely to bulge or it will pucker. So in order to keep it very flat on the body and with the body shape built in, I'll go through a series of steps in constructing this particular pocket. Let me just show you how it's going to look in the end. We're working with two colors here so that you can see the difference. We start with the pocket pouch. Now with your pattern, that piece may be attached to the garment or it may be sewn as a separate piece. Today I'm using one that's sewn as a separate piece. It is on the pocket pouch that you need to stabilize the pocket pouch. This is sort of the facing side of this construction, so that when it turns and you lay it on your side piece, that edge does not get larger. So in order to do that, you need a piece of some sort of stabilizing tape. It doesn't really matter whether you're using a fusible or a sew-in. The important thing is we're stabilizing it with tape. In order to know exactly where to place the tape, you want to measure your paper pattern precisely. Just simply take a ruler, but it's the paper pattern you're measuring, not the fashion fabric. And as I measure this, this is exactly 6 7/8 inch long. Don't round to 7 or back to 6 3/4. That 1/8 of an inch is very important. And then take the tape that you've chosen and measure out and mark on this tape exactly what your paper pattern measures. In this case, 6 7/8. And then give yourself a little leeway on either end. Just simply a 1/2 inch or so on either end will be sufficient. And now you're going to place this tape exactly on the marks at the waistline and down here at the side seam. In this particular case, I fused it on and then machine stitched right through the middle. Having done that, there is no way now that the edge of that pocket can grow. As we do with all seams, the first thing you want to do is to meld it, which means pressing on one side and pressing on the other side. This is simply done flat and is only melding the seam. And now we want to proceed to press the seam open. But remember where this is going to go on the body. We want that pant, when it is worn, to conform to our shape. So it's very important that that seam is pressed open over a hem. On the long side of the hem, you will have a nice shape which is not too severe. Simply lay your pant over, and remember the point of your iron is what's pressing the seam open. We needn't go down and do anything too hard. Just put the point of the iron right there in the center of your work. Once you have pressed that seam open, you now can turn and press the seam closed. But remember, we need to press it the way it will be worn. So in this particular construction, you must press it from the right side. So very gently, make sure that your facing piece is underneath. Use a press cloth because you're working right on the right side of the garment, and just a little bit of moisture. And then simply press that edge gently. You needn't press it heavily at this point. You're just simply setting the direction so that you can proceed to grade the seam and then top stitch. In couture, the rule is that you always press a seam allowance in its full allowance first, and then you grade it. So after you have pressed it from the right side, you now can go back in and grade. Your seam nearest the garment will be the longest. That's your pant piece. The next seam would be your pocket pouch, and last but not least would be your tape. Don't ever grade through your tape. So we can start with the tape edge. We can grade just a little bit beyond that. And then we'll grade just a little bit beyond that of the pant fabric. So here we have a perfect grade, just about a thread apart. I'll just take a little hair off that one. Again, I remind you the Pelican scissors are perfect for grading. Having graded the seam, it's very easy for you now to turn that back and lay it over the hem and pin it for basting. We're going to do a long, short basting stitch. This will ensure that it will lay flat and will not pucker during the top stitching. So simply give yourself one stitch to get started. and it's a long and a short stitch. Now don't yank it with your arm this way. Just simply take it with your fingers and pull up and lay it against the fabric. So there we are with a long, short. You want to be just inside the edge so that you'll be able to top stitch on one side of the basting thread and then the other without going through your basting stitches. So you can continue along until you have that completed. So having basted this seam, you're now going to top stitch it. So I've done a sample for you. So you're going to put it into the machine from the right side. And you're going to begin top stitching just below your side seam mark. And you're going to do the edge first. So you're going to machine stitch along that edge and pass through the waistline seam. And then do a second row exactly the same way. Remember that it needs to be pressed over the hem again using a press cloth and giving it just a light amount of steam. If you were working with a fairly bulky fabric, you might choose to use your heavy-duty press cloth so that you really can almost clap it. Once it is very dry, you now can set it up on your side pocket piece. And if ever there were a time that you needed those marks, now is it. And actually pin this over the hem. Match your mark at the side seam and match your mark at the waist, curving over the hem. Remember that each time you do a piece of this work with the slash pocket, you need to return it to the hem so that you're consistently building in that shape. Once you have matched your marks on the side piece, you can now diagonally tack this pocket in place so that you can sew the pouch. So using a diagonal tack, which is approximately a ½ inch across, and maybe an inch to an inch and a quarter long, simply run a row of diagonal tacks. Please don't pull them too tightly. They're just there to secure this so that nothing will happen to all your work while you do the remainder of the pant. This particular basting on the slash pocket will stay in till the very end of your pant construction. It'll probably be the last piece of basting that you remove. Once you have basted the slash to the side piece, you can now go to the inside and sew the side pocket to the pocket pouch. You're going to stitch on the stitching line around the entire pocket. You want to build in durability in a pocket. The minute you put your hand in the pocket, the first thing you do is your fingers go to the bottom of the pouch. So that's a rather vulnerable area. So you can double stitch the bottom of the pouch with a second row of stitching just about 1/8 of an inch away from the original. The important thing is that every row of stitches makes something stiffer. So you do not want to start at the top and go around the entire pocket. Just reinforce the bottom of the pouch. On that same vein, each row of stitching makes something stiffer. Therefore, you do not want stiffness in your waistline seam nor in your side seam. So the reason you've left the tails is so at the very end, what you can do is simply go through and remove these last few little top stitches right back to your stitching line at the waist, and you'll do exactly the same thing to the hem. You can tie a little knot back once you've brought them all through. But that way you will have no stitches in the waistline to make a little ridge. Here's your slash pocket, and you now can proceed with the remainder of the construction of your pant. Before I leave slash pockets, I would like to just show you one alternative, and that is if you're working with a bulky fabric or several layers of wool, it might be too much fabric in this area of the body, so that you can easily replace a portion of it with a piece of silk. Just cut your pattern, don't forget to add seam allowances, and then cut a portion of your pocket in silk and the remainder in your fashion fabric. This would now be the side piece, so that I would see wool, but I would go into silk, and this would be the facing piece. So that little part that I turn is wool, but the pocket itself is going to be in silk. This way you'll have a very strong and durable pocket, but it will be very thin. Just don't forget to cut it on the proper grain, then it will hang correctly. Add taffeta evening pants cut on the bias give the fluid effect of a skirt. Use a bustle bow in the back for a flirty effect. You'll see the fabric flower has been created with cords made with fast turn and have a real flower set in the center. Use an elastic waist on a skirt of this type, and it will make a nice flat finish for the bow and belt. To add weight at the hem, use bias binding and ruffle a silk petticoat underneath each leg. Channel stitch the hem of wool double knit pants. It'll add decoration as well as a cuff effect. Wool double knit takes kindly to art clothing techniques. This jacket is simply the combination of a variety of colors, pieced and piped. Take the color most flattering and use it near your face. A pipe slash pocket can add stability as well as decoration, coordinated with piping around the waistband, and it can also be used in the jacket, around the cuff, down the center of the sleeve, and up into the shoulder. In a silk tweed, as is shown in this jacket. The goal in a pair of tailored pants is that they will hang absolutely straight from the knee to the hem with no break. In order to do that, you want to change the front of the pant from the knee to the hem. And I'm going to repeat that because I want to be sure that you understand that this technique is only used on the front. It is never done on the back. It's just on the front that we want it to hang absolutely straight. So if we were to make the fibers from the knee to the hem more compact, they would weigh more and hang straighter. So that's exactly what we're going to do. And you have now basted your knee line, so you know where that is. And before you baste the pant together, stretch this area 3/8 of an inch longer than it was originally. So you can do this, do it gradually. You can do this about 3 or 4 times. Most natural fiber fabrics will let you stretch at 3/8 of an inch. If it's a more difficult fabric like gabardine or linen and you can't stretch it as much, it would be better to stretch it 1/4 of an inch than it would be none at all. So now what we have done is stretch the leg of the pant from the fence at the knee line to the hem and made it 3/8 of an inch longer. Once you've been successful at this, you want to use your press cloth with the wool on it to help dry out that area. You've put an awful lot of moisture in there. Once it is dry, you now are going to have to match this to the back, and because this is 3/8 of an inch longer, you can just immediately cut off that 3/8 of an inch and throw it away. This now means that your front and backs will match as they were originally intended. But remember too, this was your original hemline, so you will have to move up your hemline the same amount that you cut off. And now what you will have are the fibers in your knee very compact and hanging straight. I'd like to review just for a minute because there is a real sequence to making pants. So let me tell you where we are at the moment. You've cut and marked your fashion fabric. You've constructed your slash pocket. And remember, you can do that first because the slash pocket is not a fitting line. You've shrunk from the knee to the hem. That's in the front only. And next you've basted the front to the back, 2 legs. What I'd like to show you now is how you can have a very nice smooth line over the side of your pant in the hip area. We all have a little hollow right here, and you can just find yours, the fullness of your upper hip. Just put your hand right in here and find the hollow. Everybody has one, and they tend to show more in pants than they do in a dress. So what we're going to do is make a little hip stabilizer so that your pant will hang smooth over your side and not show that little hollow. So the first thing you need to do is find out how long your hollow is. It'll differ from one person to another. It might be as narrow as 3 inches or as long as 5 inches. So find out what your hollow is. To cut a hip stabilizer, you want to take a piece of woven interfacing and cut it on the bias. Cut yourself a strip that's 1.5 inches wide and 2 inches longer than your hip hollow. So if, for instance, your hollow is 5 inches, you would be cutting this piece 7 inches long. And remember, you need to cut 2, 1 for each side of your pant. Once you've done that, you are simply going to place it along the back of the pant so that 1/2 inch goes into the seam allowance and 1 inch goes into the pant. And just simply pin that in. Your side seam at this point is basted. Therefore, there really isn't any need for additional basting. So once you go to the machine and sew it, you're going to sew right on your stitching line, and you will catch this into the seam allowance at the same time. There's no need for you to do anything else about this. Once you have sewn it and press your seam open, it will just simply stay in there and hold the shape of the side seam of your pant. The next thing you want to do before you go to the machine is you want to make a little pocket for the knee. And I'll show you this in real cloth. Here's your knee line, which you have basted in. Take your chalk and simply mark on the stitching line 2 inches above and 2 inches below. And you're going to do this both on the inseam as well as the outseam. And then on the knee line, you're going to measure in 1/8 of an inch. And it sounds like such a little amount, but it makes a big difference when you sew your pant. And then take the French curve way down in the shallow area and connect those 3 points. And reverse it and connect them here. There's no need to baste or even to pin this. Your side seams are basted, so once you start stitching, you're going to stitch up and then follow your chalk line and then come back on your basted line for the remainder of the seam. Just that little bit of shallowing at the knee will prevent the knee from bagging out and will help your pants to hang perfectly straight. When you're sewing the crotch area, it doesn't matter whether you have a back zipper or a front fly zipper. You're obviously going to leave that space open for the zipper, but you're always sewing the crotch from the back to the front, leaving whichever area open you need for the zipper. In the crotch area, you always want to do a second row of stitches 1/4 of an inch away from the original stitching, but only in the crotch area. When you press your seams open, and you will certainly need to do that in the front and the back, you want to clip away right back to that 1/4 inch mark around the crotch area and simply cut it off. I'll just erase this from the board so that you can really see that that has been simply clipped away. The crotch area of a pant is exactly like the underarm of a sleeve. The goal is that the seam will be kept upright at all times and not fall to one side or the other. So it's very important that you hand overcast that seam. And there really is no substitute. Serging is not acceptable, and certainly you don't want to do any other kind of zigzagging. It's the one time, both in the crotch and sleeves, that you ought to do that by hand. Now, it is not necessary to tape a crotch area in a traditional pair of pants. That double stitching is going to hold that crotch area perfectly. If you've ever had difficulty doing a fly front zipper, I'd like to show you an easy way to do it. Fly front zippers are very appropriate in casual wear, and with these easy steps, you can make the zipper in the front of your pant look just terrific. If I can take you back just for a minute to the paper pattern, remember when we said you need to mark everything on your fashion fabric? It would be very important for you to mark the center front line and the zipper line, the dot at the bottom of the zipper, and there's always a little dot at the bottom of what will become the fly. So all of these have been marked on your fashion fabric. You want to stitch on your stitching line from the crotch point all the way up to the front, starting at the regular number of stitches per inch, and in the area between the end of the fly flap and the bottom of the fly, you want to do 20 stitches per inch. And from that point up to the waist, do basting stitches. This is just going to hold it together until the fly front is completed. First thing you want to do is continue your flap around and clip it all the way into the stitching line. That's the reason you need those 20 stitches per inch there. Next, you're going to press this open. And a fly front is done flat on a board. Remember, it's just the center line that needs pressing so that it lays flat. You're now going to lay your zipper in, and just before you do, give it a couple of zips back and forth to be absolutely sure it's in working order. And I remind you that this needs to be pre-shrunk in hot tap water and then air dried. So with the pre-shrunk zipper, you're going to lay it on the side of the garment that is not going to have the fly stitching. And you're going to pin it, lay it so the edge of the zipper is right along the center front line, and you're going to pin it to the seam allowance only. And always pin it a diagonal to the zipper. You're going to be doing this flat so that it will be perfectly in line. Once you have done that, you're going to machine stitch with a zipper foot from the bottom all the way to the top. And on every zipper, there is a little woven line that will give you a guideline as to where you need to stitch so that you won't actually stitch into the zipper. So you're sewing the zipper just to the pink side only. Here we have it. You will then turn it over and do one row of edge stitching. You would do it in the proper color to your fabric, but it's an excellent way to just give it a slick look. The next step is to lay that zipper over onto what will become the fly front. And again, you're pinning it just to the allowance only. And you're pinning at an angle. So once this has been stitched, it's kind of floating in the breeze. You're going to lay it down so that it is perfectly flat on the fly side and pin through all thicknesses. Again, pinning at an angle. And then you're going to baste on the edge of this zipper. One of the things that you want is to be able to know what is my guideline in top stitching this zipper. So you're going to baste with a long stitch to the outside so you'll have a nice clean line. And here's your basted zipper line. Next, you're going to top stitch, and in couture, 2 rows of top stitching is always better than 1, and spacing them a narrow amount is also a touch of couture. So in this case, you can do a row of top stitching on either side of your basting. And last but not least, you will remove your basting stitches, both where you've top stitched and between the 2 fabrics, and you will have a perfectly constructed fly front zipper. The seam finishes for pants are limitless, but I'd just like to show you a few. These are cotton pants which are serged, and bias seams don't ravel, therefore they don't need any finish at all. On double knits and jerseys, you might pink, and then for the real couture touch, you would do a Hong Kong finish and bind each seam in silk. Wool crepe pants can be very elegant when combined with a silk print blouse. These do not have a separate waistband, but continue up into the torso area with a self-covered belt to give the effect of empire. For a casual but couture look, combine a checked pant with a print top. When we talk about couture linings, there are two fabrics that particularly come to mind. One is silk charmeuse and the other is silk crepe de chine. Let me tell you a little bit about the differences so it'll be easier for you to make a choice. If you want a thin lining and one which will wear cooler, you want to choose silk crepe de chine. If you want to add body to a garment, or you want it to wear warmer, then you might choose charmeuse. Let's just look at the differences. This one is silk crepe de chine, and the other is silk charmeuse. To help you make a decision as to which one of these you might choose for your pant, there's several criteria. The first is, do you want it thin? That's crepe de chine. Or do you want it bouncy and help enhance the fabric? You would choose charmeuse. The other thing you need to remember is that crepe de chine is going to wear cooler, whereas charmeuse is going to wear warmer. So you might choose your lining to enhance the fabric or to enhance your wearability. If you have a slash pocket in your pant pattern, you need to do a little preparation before you cut out the lining. You want to match the garment to the pocket piece, the side piece, just as you would when you were sewing it together with fashion fabric. What you'll notice is that that little ease is still in there for the hand in the pocket. And we've got to remove that from the lining because we want to cut all of this in one piece. So simply lay it on your board, and right in the middle of that slash area, simply cut through that piece at an angle all the way to the center front. And that will automatically lay down, and you can scotch tape it in place. And now your pattern is perfectly flat and ready to be used as a lining piece. When you are sewing your lining together, I want to show you something that you need to do in the crotch area. Remember, in the garment itself, we stitched and left this seam at 1/4 of an inch. When you drop your lining into this pant, it will be necessary that your lining seam be 1/4 of an inch higher than the original in order to rest on the top of the garment seam. So you have marked your lining on the original stitching line. In the curved area only, to correspond to the garment, just simply indicate with chalk a new stitching line which is 1/4 of an inch higher than the original. This will allow you to drop your lining into the pant, and it will ride at exactly the right place. It will feel comfortable and will hang perfectly. Let me just tell you about lining hems. Lining should be hemmed independently from the garment so they can hang free. You usually want to hang a lining about 1/2 an inch higher than the pant itself. If you don't choose to use a lining in your pant, and there may be many times that you don't, you might want to have a crotch liner. It's best if this is made out of silk because silk breathes and absorbs moisture, and it'll make your walking easier in your pant. Let me show you how we draw this on the paper pattern. On your paper pattern, you're going to mark up on the crotch curve approximately 4 inches, and do this both in the front and the back. On the inseam, mark down about 5 inches, again on the front and the back. And then just simply draw a nice curve connecting those 2 points. It's about the kind of curve that you see on a shoulder pad. The important thing now is that you must be sure that your crotch liner pattern is exactly the same grain as your pant, so it will hang the same way. So be sure you transfer the grain line to both pieces. The front and the back of the pant may look very different to you, but when you do crotch liners, they're going to look very much alike when you cut them apart. So help yourself by putting a little F and a little B so you will know which is which. You're going to sew the crotch liner exactly the way you sew the pant. Sew the inseams together and then sew the crotch curve. Grade the crotch curve back to about an 1/8 or a 1/16 of an inch, as small as you possibly can. Turn it and give it a very hard press. And then simply lay it into the pant so that the inseams match. And in order to keep it there, just turn it back and baste the seam of your garment to the seam of the crotch liner. Here's a wide variety of the hem finishes you might try. This wool flannel has a simple Hong Kong finish done with silk crepe de chine. In knits, you might try channel stitching to give body and weight at the bottom of a pant. It doesn't matter whether it's a wide leg pant or a narrow leg pant. The channel stitching serves the same purpose of weight. If you have a cuff at the bottom of your pant, don't neglect the possibility that you can interface it. It will give a crispness yet softness to the cuff hem. If you have a wide leg pant, which is almost like a circle, consider binding the edge. It will be easier than turning up that circle. In crepe, you might consider a little narrow bound hem, which gives a finishing couture touch. It too should be interfaced substantially, and in this particular case, the interfacing almost replaces a wider hem. Leather pants are fun, they're easy to wear, they're terribly comfortable. They're easy to sew, except that there's a little difference between traditional sewing and leather. So we'll start with your equipment list. You need paper clips instead of pins. We don't want to make any unnecessary holes in the leather. And then you're going to need chalk for marking. And with leather, we glue seams together, and barge cement is a quick-drying, easy glue to use. You'll need a glue stick in order to stick the seams together while you're sewing them. And then you need a leather needle. A leather needle is angular and comes to a point. That's so it can puncture the leather. Therefore, it makes little triangle holes rather than your traditional round holes. You can see that if you got those too close together, they would overlap and your seam would rip. So this is the major reason why you need to use 12 stitches per inch and not exceed that, or your little holes will begin to get too close together. You're going to need some Scotch tape, and then you're going to just need your old kitchen hammer, just a good hammer, to which you'll take a scrap of your leather and put it right over the end of the hammer. We're going to pound seams a little bit later, and what you don't want is to have the metal end of the hammer to make a mark. So just simply tie an elastic band with a little piece of your leather, and that tool will be ready. The only other thing you're going to need is that you're going to need a piece of grosgrain ribbon. You'll make your waistband traditionally, but you don't want a double piece of leather on the back side. So you're going to put a piece of grosgrain ribbon on. And And don't be fearful of having pleats in a leather pant. They add a certain amount of softness, and gradually there will be a patina to the leather that's very attractive. But you don't want to pin. You want to run a little row of stitches right across the top of the pleat, and then in the back, simply apply Scotch tape. And when you tape across, that will be as if you're basting when you do traditional sewing. When we go to sew a seam, the first thing that you have to do is to glue the seam together. Be light-handed about this and just give a little dot periodically, and then finger press the seam together. In areas where you have slash pockets or you have an extra thickness, you might want to use a paper clip in addition to the glue stick to hold that seam flat when you go to the machine. Remember that you're stitching about 12 stitches per inch. You don't want those stitches so close together that the little triangles overlap and the seam rips out. Once you've sewn your seam, you want to immediately tear apart that glue stick seam. And at the beginning, it'll be just a little bit sticky, but don't worry, it dries and it will not damage the look of your garment. The next step is going to be to apply the barge cement. We don't want our seams flapping around. We can't press them with an iron, so we're going to glue them together with barge. And because barge is a contact glue, you've got to have a mirror image where you glue on the seam side, immediately glue opposite it on the garment side. And the instructions say to let it dry for about 5 minutes so it gets a little bit tacky before you put it down. And I strongly recommend that you do that. Once it has dried a little, you're then going to simply fold the seam back and just dot press it with your fingers. Now's the part that you can get all your frustrations out because we're going to pound the seams down. And you need a piece of wood. Don't do it on your table because you're liable to make a mark. Any chopping block, breadboard, any piece of wood will do. Simply lay your garment down and use the hammer that you've covered and pound in a rhythm. Don't keep going in one place. Just simply get yourself a rhythm together, and it usually only needs one pounding. You don't have to repeat it. Once you've completed a seam, I would suggest that you just let it stay there for a few minutes to continue drying so that it won't pull out when you proceed with the rest of your work. One of the things in leather that you want to think about is darts. A dart is very important in a pant because you want the same kind of fit that you get in a traditional pant. But the dart point is difficult to handle. The first thing to remember is you've got to stay at that 12 stitches per inch. You can neither back tack at the end nor come down to a smaller stitch or you'll rip it out and make a hole. So sew your dart all the way down using that traditional stitch. Now we need to cut our dart. Just go right down to the center. Leave, 3/4 to an inch right at the bottom and finger press it open. And what you're going to be doing is you're going to be doing the same thing with the dart that you did with the seams. And you're going to have to do it flat because you're pounding. Now remember, the dart is there to form a curve. So be sure that you don't pound the curve flat while you're doing the glue. And I'll do this rather quickly, but remind you that the cement has to be a mirror image and opposite to each other, and you're going to let it dry for just about 5 minutes. Once it's dry, finger press it down and use your hammer. Maybe 3 pounds is enough not to get into that dart point where there is shape. And now we're going to put it up on a cam in order to really fix the end of that dart. And you're going to do it with a little piece, a circle is best, of woven fusible interfacing. Now remember, we talked about interfacing as being needing heat, moisture, and pressure. But leather cannot stand moisture. So we're going to precondition this little piece with some steam. And just take it and lay it down with the bead side up and give it just a little bit of steam. Not a lot, but just a little bit. Now remember to switch your iron to dry because we don't want moisture on our leather. And once it's been preconditioned, you're simply going to lay it over the end of the dart and give it just a little bit of heat from the iron directly. Not a lot, and be sure your iron isn't touching the rest of the leather. You can then put your press cloth over it, and now you can apply a little bit of pressure, and remember it takes about 15 seconds for this to adhere, so don't be too quick about it. And then let your hand help it to dry. And feel free to give it that shape that you want, because you want that shape in the dart to go over the back side of your body. Waistbands are applied traditionally. You're going to sew a seam, but the back of the waistband, instead of being another piece of leather, should be a piece of grosgrain ribbon. You can purchase grosgrain ribbon in a variety of widths, therefore your waistband can be a variety of widths. And all you're going to do is to simply take a long piece of leather and apply the grosgrain. Just lay it on and top stitch it right near the edge, leaving about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch seam on the leather. You'll need to interface the back of your waistband just like you do in a traditional one, and you can apply it the same way. Give it a little bit of steam, and then fuse it with a dry iron. And then you can simply proceed to attach your waistband in the regular manner using the grosgrain as the back side of the waistband. Here's the final result. Leather pants that combine several of the techniques that I just spoke about. Several pattern pieces, a wonderful bound buttonhole, inserts in a contrasting color, using top stitching for definition. These pants have both a yoke in the front as well as in the back. A perfectly shaped waistband is going to make your garment more comfortable. This is especially important in pants, and I'm going to show you how you can do this for the maximum amount of comfort and ease in wearing throughout the life of your garment. You want to begin with a cross-grain piece of fabric. Cross-grain has give, and that's what you want going around your body. Cut your waistband twice the finished width plus 2 5/8 inch seams. Simply start with the fabric and fold it in half, giving it a light press. Throughout the shaping of a waistband, you always want to do your work on the back of the waistband. That's the side that is going to be nearest to your body. That prevents any shine from appearing on the front. You might want to use a press cloth, but for the purposes here, I'm going to use the iron directly on the fabric. What we're going to do is take the cross grain and contour it by shaping with the iron. Give plenty of steam and release all your frustrations at this point. Just simply get the iron and stretch and pull. It's the one time in sewing when you really can put a great deal of energy and pressure into the fabric. What you will see is that you get a curve on the folded edge, which makes it smaller than the raw edge that's going to be sewn to your garment. You want to fold the waistband and just give it a light press to establish the initial fold. Now we want to shape it, and this is a great place to get rid of your frustrations and use a lot of energy and pressure, because we're going to give it some steam and we are going to pull and stretch and steam. And don't move your iron too fast. You want to dry it just a little bit so that the folded edge gets a nice curve on it, which will be smaller than the raw edge, which will be sewn to the pant. Once you've established the first little curve, then you want to simply duplicate that and overlap it and continue it for the length of your waistband. Just keep doing it. Now remember, you have put a great deal of shape into this waistband with the steam, so let it set there for a few minutes so that it dries. Your next step is going to be to interface it. You want to choose an interfacing which is woven and fusible. This will begin to build the stiffness in your waistband. The first interfacing that you're going to apply will be cut on the bias. This will continue to shape your waistband. I know it sounds funny after you have put all this great shape in that you would immediately turn around and fuse it and lay it flat. But it really is going to reshape because natural fibers have a memory. You want to put your fusible interfacing on the side that will be nearest to the outside. And it will go over the fold 5/8 of an inch. This means that you will now have double interfacing in your fold. The reason that you do not want interfacing on the back side of your waistband is that we're going to need to make the back side smaller. It's like concentric circles. So we want it to fit you perfectly. So you're going to fuse your interfacing to the front side of the waistband. Now, heat your fabric just a little bit. Remember that fusible interfacing requires 3 things to make it fuse. The first is heat. That's going to come from your iron. 2, you need moisture. And 3, you need pressure. Moisture is coming from a damp press cloth. The steam in your iron is not sufficient to fuse because it's only coming out of these little tiny holes. So you do need a damp press cloth. Lay the press cloth on your work, put your iron down, and give it 15 full seconds of pressure. Sounds like a long time. Count 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. Don't neglect that time factor or the fusing process will not be complete and your interfacing is liable to lift from the fabric. Once you have done that, immediately turn it back. And remember, you're going to have to turn it to the other side because we're always working from the back side. And just simply reshape. Especially natural fiber fabrics always have a memory. And so that waistband will remember and will immediately go back into the curve. Couture sewing has a lot to do with touch and feel. How would you like your waistband to feel? Touch it at that point. If it's stiff enough, you're finished. But if you would like the waistband stiffer, you can apply now a second piece of fusible interfacing. And I'm going to simply use black and white so that you can see the difference. You're going to cut this second piece only the width of the waistband. It is not going in the fold and it is not going in the seam allowance. And then simply repeat the process of what you did the first time. A little bit of heat. Just gently dot the interfacing down. Use your damp press cloth, your iron, and pressure for 15 seconds. Once that is complete, you can go immediately back and you can reshape your waistband. Now, again, I caution you to let this dry before you begin picking it up and moving it about. For most people, that will be a sufficient amount of interfacing in the waistband itself. But what you may have is the curling of the edge of the waistband. This can be prevented by running rows of stitching on the back side of the waistband. Every row of stitches makes something stiffer. Therefore, if we run a series of rows of stitching on the back side of the waistband only, and through that little bit of interfacing that came over onto the back side, the edge with the fold will be stiffer and will not roll over. So starting at the folded edge, run a row of stitches that is about 12 to 15 stitches per inch, and continue 1/8 of an inch apart, making row upon row of stitches. After each row of stitches, touch and feel and see if this is the stiffness that you desire. Obviously, you will be doing it in the same color thread as your fashion fabric. And what this will give you is a perfectly shaped, non-rolled edge, very comfortable, contoured to your body. An attractive variation on the traditional waistband is one that is piped with commercial piping that you might buy in your fabric store. It certainly frames the waistband, but it also gives additional stability at the top as a further way to prevent it rolling. When you pipe, you're going to need two pieces. You're going to need the front of your waistband and the back of your waistband. So you want to cut it the width that you desire for the finished waistband, plus 2 5/8 inch seams. And you'll shape each one exactly the same way as you shaped your double traditional waistband. You're going to be applying your piping to the piece which will be nearest the outside, and it is that piece which needs to be interfaced. So you will always want to interface the front part of your waistband first and then apply the piping. Set your piping up so that the ridge nearest the piping is directly on your 5/8 inch stitching line. And I'll give you a little hint. Once you complete this process, you're going to need to cover this up with the back of the waistband in order to stitch it. So if you will use a contrasting color thread in your bobbin when you first apply your piping, it will be very easy for you to see it when you stitch. So we're going to apply our piping. The stitching line at the ridge of the piping is going to be on the 5/8 inch line, and you are going to use your zipper foot, riding that as close to the piping edge as possible. Piping is applied 1 to 1, so simply lay it on and stitch, and you will notice that it very easily follows the curve that you've established in your shaping. So you're applying 1 row of piping to the top of the waistband and 1 row of piping to the bottom of the waistband. And then you can simply proceed by sewing the back side of your waistband on, the teal being the back of the waistband and the pink, of course, being the front. It's very important that you meld your threads. And in this particular case, we don't want the iron to go down on the whole waistband because it will flatten the piping. So just let your iron ride right in the seam allowance so that the edge of the iron is right on the row of stitches. And once you have melded one side, turn it over and meld the other side. That will ensure that you will have a perfectly creased edge and no fabric riding up on your piping. Once you have melded the thread, then simply turn the waistband over, finger press it a little bit, and then apply your iron lightly just to seal that crease along the edge of the piping. It's going to be important for you to grade this seam. Remember, the longest seam is always to the outside, and then we have our piping, and the shortest seam is nearest to the inside. So in this particular case, we'll grade the pink just a hair wider than the piping. Never grade piping. And then you're going to grade the back side just shy of the piping so that we have 3 separate grades. And this is a very good place to use your pelican scissor because you can get in and literally cut one thread away so that we have within the top of our waistband a perfect grade. The outside is longer than the piping. The short side, the back side, is the smallest amount. And that's a perfect grade, and it will never show a ridge. Your waistband is now complete and is ready to be sewn on to your pants. These pants are wool knit with a metallic gold thread. To highlight the gold in the pant, the top is made of gold lame shirred on either side of the bodice. A mock mink coat makes a perfect cover-up over pants worn to the theater or the grocery store. Mock mink lined in silk really looks like the real thing. This jumpsuit in wool crepe has an insert at the waist to give the effect of a yoke and is self-piped for added stability.